Hey, what's up? It's the Fit Mess. This is Jeremy. Zach's not with me today. That's all right. It's just you and me. And my guest, Adam Dorsey. He's a psychologist. He knows a thing or two about how to get happy, about how to find your purpose, about how to figure out what it is to get through this life without loads and loads of pain constantly. Getting to the end of the year here, and I don't know about you. My mental health is on the brink. It's not always great. I get a little nostalgic at this time of year, which I don't love. I don't love it because it keeps me stuck in the past, which triggers a little bit of depression, triggers a little bit of feeling sad, missing what's gone, grieving what I've lost. And it doesn't usually kick into, the happiness, the looking forward, the hope, all of that sort of kicks in when the sun comes back up in the spring. Because that's the other thing. This time of year, the dark, the short days, the sun sets at 4 o'clock in the fucking afternoon. Jesus. Can we just live with daylight saving time? Anyways, enough about that. Again, my guest today is Adam Dorsey. We're going to talk about his book, Super Psyched: Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. What a cool guy. When you do these sort of interviews all the time, some people you connect with, some people it's, you kind of talk to them and time goes by and you sort of forget you did that interview. I think I have a new best friend though, because we played best friend bingo sort of accidentally. And we have a lot of pop cultural connections that intertwined. And we talked about a lot of those while talking about the questions I started with, like trying to figure out what it is to even be a man these days. There's people throw around toxic masculinity and what it means to participate in that. Talk about being happy. It's the elusive being happy, something that you get blips of, desperately hang on to, and then it disappears again. Maybe that's just me. And what it means to be a success, right? Like I still don't know that I have a purpose in life beyond being my kid's dad. That's the thing that drives me. That is my everything. And part of me knows that that's unhealthy because one day they'll grow up and move out and live their own lives. And then I'll be left here trying to figure out what's next for me. And so I'm trying to accept that I'll deal with that when the time comes and just lean into what needs to be done right now, because that's where I usually find the most peace is in the moment and trying to just stay focused and grounded on what's in front of me, what needs my attention right now, because, there's no guarantee that tomorrow's even coming. So, be aware, know that it's there, prepare as much as possible, but stay focused in the moment. In this moment, we have an amazing interview with Adam Dorsey. Very cool guy. We hit it off immediately. And I'm excited to share this conversation with you. We were just sort of chit-chatting when the conversation got started, and he was asking about the origin of this show. And so I decided to leave this part in for those of you that may be a new listener, don't know how we got started. We've been around for a few years, but I wanted to leave that in just so for those of you that don't know how this show got started, that's where we're going to pick up the conversation. But we will get into all of the questions that a lot of people face, that I know I face. What it means to be a success. How do you cope with happiness coming and going? What does it mean to be a man? These very big questions that I think a lot of people wrestle with. I know I do. And so I just wanted to share this conversation with you. But again, we'll pick up with how the Fit Mess got started. That started, I think we're in our 6th or 7th year now.
Dude, congratulations. Wow. That's amazing.
I've been podcasting for 20 years. I worked in commercial radio for 20 years. But yeah, about 7 years ago, my buddy and I, who I normally do the show with, we were both on kind of a get our shit together journey and having a lot of really open, vulnerable conversations. And we kind of looked at each other and went, dudes don't do this. We should do a show. And so we did. We just started basically having the same conversations we were having around campfires into microphones and built a little following. So,
Jeremy, that is an incredible backstory.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm totally with you in terms of dudes don't do this type of thing, fill in the blank. It's like, yeah, can't we though? Can't we be straight men and still do these things?
Right. Yeah. It's, I know it's scary and the feelings are terrible. And as you've said, you would rather shock yourselves with the electrical devices than talk about them. But here we are.
100%. And I mean, you actually physically look like one of my friends and even kind of resemble even his mannerisms. Who funny. Is of this ilk, who just gets it and is like, you know what? When I was a kid, we had basically 3-ish options. I should have included it in my book or my TEDx talk to be more precise. But we had like basically James Bond, John Wayne, and Joe Montana. 3 James.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was none of those.
No, totally, right?
There was an eye guy too, Indiana Jones, but he's like James Bond. I was none of those.
Yeah. No, I was much more like farm boy Luke Skywalker than Jedi Luke Skywalker.
I actually think they're the same guy. That's a campfire conversation,
right?
I think they're the same.
You think they're the same guy?
Yeah.
Both the Jedi and the farm boy.
Yeah.
But how does the farm boy become the Jedi in the modern world? Because there are so many cultural pulls in a number of directions. Most of them are in the manly, rub some dirt on it, how dare you have feelings path. But how does Luke become a Jedi?
I haven't really given it much thought, but I'll tell you my knee jerk.
Okay.
We see Luke as Jedi in episode 6, Return of the Jedi, when he walks into Jabba's hut and he's a badass. Like, it is on.
Right.
And yet he maintains his integrity and kindness and decision to not go his father's route. And he basically said what many of us in our generation have said, and that is, this stops with me. Whatever this thing is, it stops with me. And he proceeded, we see him in 7, 8, 9. People have different ideas about, how good they were. Actually, I guess more like end of 7 and then 8 and 9.
Right.
But
yeah.
I freaking loved those movies. I get so much
I'm
shade
literally
for that.
wearing a Star Wars t-shirt right now. I mean, that's how much of a dork I am. So,
but I mean, 7, 8, 9. The
yeah.
J.J. Abrams. Some people give me a lot of shade for loving those and saying, "Oh gosh, 7 was just basically the same as, episode 4."
Yeah.
But you can tell I've given this a lot of thought. I mean, the cat in the box who's behind me, sadly, who died and his remains remain with me. His name was Yoda, so you can guess that
my God, that's great.
This whole idea, this Jungian archetypes that inform so much of George Lucas's thinking, I think, are so crucial, and I almost consider it required watching at least 4, 5, and 6, which 5, in my opinion, is the best of the 3 by a long shot.
Yeah. I as a young man, I don't remember how old I was, but I specifically remember having a poster on my wall that had a picture of Yoda, and it said, "Everything I needed to know about life I learned from Star Wars." And it's like key life lessons that are just listed on this. I wish I still had it, because it was like a guiding force in my life to have this poster on the wall. But I don't want to make this all about Star Wars. Let's make this a little bit more about how you're out there helping guys like us that are having these struggles. And I'm going to warn you, this is very likely to turn into a therapy conversation. I literally went to my therapist last night and came home with just like these kind of open wounds that I've been ruminating on ever since. Because a lot of them, I think, relate to parts of what a lot of your clients deal with. I know you work with a lot of like highly successful, very powerful people that still, like many of them, achieve all the success, but still end up hollow inside. Talk to me a little bit about what their struggles are, and then I want to sort of contrast that with my own experience and see where some of the healing can begin.
Absolutely. So the billboards we grew up with, when I was talking about James Bond, John Wayne, and Joe Montana, those were the advertisements we received. That's what it meant to be a man. And part of that, if you think of all 3 of them, is ignoring your pain, which, by the way, great short-term strategy. I'm totally down with getting through the football game. I'm a huge Joe Montana fan. Loving some James Bond, even though he's a sociopath and probably a little bit of a psychopath. John Wayne, please. I mean, I don't think that that's a way to go through life in any way, shape, or form. That version of masculinity may have some elements that are good, but for the most part, not really down with it. Michael Meade, who's one of my all-time favorite thinkers, describes 3 brothers who need to go save their father's life. And each of them rides off on a horse in succession, and each of them passes a dwarf at the side of the road who asks them, "Where are you going?" And the first 2 brothers basically say, "F off, you're just a dwarf. I don't need you." The third one gets off his horse and says, "I don't know where I'm going." And the dwarf says, "It's really good that you got off your horse, because your brothers actually just rode off a cliff." And that's really hard for us guys. We're supposed to know where we're going. I mean, the old tiring chestnut of the guy who doesn't want to ask for directions. We hear about that guy all the time. And to some extent, I can be that guy too. I mean, I'm definitely a guy. And we need to get off our horse, get a little bit more introspective, ask ourselves, where are we going? Because generally, these successful guys who did amazing things basically sacrificed in order to get into the best colleges and to the best internships, perhaps graduate school, and then work their way up the ladder only to find out that they're still just them. Conan O'Brien talks about this a lot on his podcast. He's like, you'd expect with all the accolades and all of the incredible things about being Conan O'Brien would allow him to say, I'm free, I'm emancipated. And lo and behold, it still sucks to be Conan in certain ways. He describes that. Yeah. So it's not achievement, but it's about following our true path. Now, Conan, I'm pretty sure, has followed his true path. But many of the folks who, married the quote right person, lived in the quote right neighborhoods, had the right jobs, etc., find that those weren't actually the things they really wanted from their lives. And if they'd just taken a moment to do what Adam Grant talks about out of Wharton, and that is not ask themselves who they want to be, but ask themselves what verbs are true for them. We talk a lot about pronouns, but what about our verbs? Like, what is it that you really, Jeremy, what is it that you really, really love to do? What are the verbs that relate to that?
Were you in the office with my therapist last night? This is literally what I was going to ask you about. And quickly, I'm going to check off my best friend bingo card over here. So far, we've talked about Star Wars, Conan O'Brien. You're doing very well for yourself. And by the end of this, I'm pretty sure we're going to be best friends.
I love that. And by the way, for the listener, I'm not providing therapy. This is for informational purposes only.
Jeremy, for entertainment purposes
could very
only.
well become a very good friend based on the vibe I'm feeling. So, I can't do therapy on friends, but I can have a real discussion the way I would over a beer with a friend. Right. Which would be something like this.
So this is where we landed last night in my therapy session. So I have never been one of those guys, one of those driven, ambitious, go to the top school, get the best job, make loads of money. I'm good with just like getting to spin around on this rock for a while. Like, this is pretty cool. And so that led me to, just taking the job that fit, that seemed kind of cool, did that for a while, burned out, got sick of it, moved on, got super intentional a couple of years ago about the kind of life I wanted to live, where I wanted to live it, made all the jumps to have that happen. But what's still missing is that job, right? Like that thing that I am to the outside world. And what's hard about it is trying to wrap my head around your very question. Where am I going? What do I want to do? What do I want to be doing with my life? I don't know. And I have never known. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a house with alcoholism where it was an issue. And so there's definitely some, little T trauma issues that came with that. And I've lived with depression my entire life, which, is probably a big reason why I have a hard time figuring out what I want to be and, when I grow up and all of that. But there is not a single thing that I wake up every day going, oh, I can't wait to do that. Let's go. I want to be the best at that. Like I'm good, right? Like I've got the wife I want, the kids I want, I live where I want. Like I'm good, but there's this cultural pull to be the success, to make the money, to be able to write the check, to pay for whatever my kids want, to provide the life of their dreams. And I'm not driven enough to chase anything hard enough to make their dreams come true, which ultimately is making my dream come true, right? Like I want to provide for them, but I can't attach myself to something enough to go be the best at it.
So you're dropping a lot of good stuff and a lot of useful stuff for the listeners. I'm quite sure that many people will connect with this conundrum that you're in, mm-hmm. And some of the things that you've done to alleviate it. But of course, none of us ever reaches the top of that mountain entirely and says, finished, solved, cured. It's like we die unfinished. I mean, like Leonardo da Vinci once said, there's no, art is never finished, only abandoned. And similarly, I think existentially, our lives are never, fully finished. We just kind of run the clock.
Yeah.
But if we use that dash between our birth date and our death date really well, and it sounds like you're already doing that. And I mean, you are already an example to many of the listeners who could benefit from it. You're engaging in many of the verbs that you like. And many of the verbs that a person likes are predictive of what they'll want to end up doing. I'm guessing that one of the things that you care about is learning, that you've got a ton of curiosity, and learning is great for you. I'm guessing also that love as a verb is very important to you.
Yeah.
And these are all true core strengths. These are what are referred to in positive psychology as values in action, or virtues, or character strengths. And you're rocking those muscle groups every day. And that's one of the reasons why I love what Adam Grant talks about, is because many of the jobs that our children want are not yet in business. We don't even know what the jobs a decade from now will look like. We didn't know that there would be an AI wrangler just 20 years ago. And when I was in college, a little over 30 years ago, we did not know what a web designer was. And now everybody knows what a web designer was and is. And, you know, in many cases, AI may even be handling that. So people who love that type of thing may need to also engage their verbs in other ways. But in terms of what you just described, the idea that we should be doing more, we should be getting more, is social comparison. I roll up to meet my friend and he tells me about all of his massive business successes that are just, I mean, have so many zeros after them. And I've got a few options. One of them is I can celebrate what he's done and cheer him on. Or I could get really envious, or I could do both, or themes and variations of other things. Of course, I might feel a little bit envious. Wow, are you serious? That many zeros? You never need to worry about money again. That's amazing. And I might feel some sense of being inferior or envious or whatever it might be. And I can claim that inside, but the right answer, I think, with that friend, as much as possible, is to cheer for them. And to then ask myself, and what do I got? And how can I appreciate it even more? Not get complacent, not go for more if I want to go for more, but how can I appreciate it more? What we appreciate appreciates. And your determination to ride this rock and love what you've got is amazing. Depression sucks, by the way. Depression will cloud. It's like wearing the world's worst pair of glasses because it informs the way we see the planet, and it needs to be addressed. It can really suck the life out of anything. It can cause us to take less joy in things that we previously found joyful. It can ruin our sleep. It can ruin our eating. It can even cause other more troubling issues like suicidal ideation. So depression really needs to be handled in some meaningful way, whether it's through therapy or medicine or both, or something else. There are even lots of studies that indicate that doing 6 days of intensive cardio, as long as it's not medically contraindicated, can have the same effect as an SSRI medication on depression and anxiety. So that's really comforting. Even the American Psychiatric Association has acknowledged that, and they have a vested interest in seeing that patients take medications. So coming from them, that's a pretty massive endorsement for engaging cardio. But for some people, that's not enough. But social comparisons are just terrible.
So there's a couple of roads I want to go there. And one is the social comparison thing, because I probably do compare myself to my peers, my friends and things more than I even would acknowledge or can think of right now. But what I do is compare me now to me 20 years from now.
Boom.
And that's where I get scared. I get scared because I'm looking through the lens of I've spent the last, decade plus getting my shit together, like growing up, putting down the bottle, like being a better person. And so I look back 20 years and go, God, what if I had known? What if I had known how much better things could be now if I'd started then? So I get scared looking 20 years into the future going, what are you screwing up right now that you're going to wish you had done then? And that's where a lot of it, because money is like the missing piece of the puzzle for me. I get stuck there where it's like, what should you be doing? You should really be setting yourself up for the future. And then that's when I kind of just end up in this no man's land of like, I don't know. But that's where I was at 20 going, what are you going to do with your life? How are you going to take care of yourself? And rather than deal with it and face my fears and all that, I, drank a lot and hung out with my friends and did dumb crap that kids in their 20s do. So my comparison is to the fictional version of me in the future that has failed me as much as, the 20-year-old version of me failed me now. Do what you can with that.
Well, Jeremy, I'm not going to be the only guy who says this, but you just spoke in class today, except you're not going to do what he does at the end of the song.
Okay, I'm going to mark Pearl Jam on the best friend bingo card.
Eddie Vedder, one of the greatest voices of all time.
Oh, my God.
I mean, come on. All right. So you're asking yourself, first of all, the first thing that you're doing about comparing yourself to who you were 20 years ago, I think that's one of the best measures. We can compare ourselves to others. We can compare ourselves to what we perceive as norms in society, or we can compare ourselves to ourselves. I like the third one. The third one is going to give you the biggest ROI, because if I compare myself to my buddy Scott, who's got, a master's in engineering and has a very different mind than mine, what's the point of that? I mean, that's just going to drive me nuts. So first thing first, compare yourself to yourself. Compare yourself to who you were 20 years ago, and think about yourself 20 years from now. One thing, and this is a big one, the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life. So if you ask yourself, hey, Jeremy, what are you screwing up right now? It's like a Google search. Like, imagine your brain having like a Google search bar. You're going to get a lot of answers and you're going to feel pretty crappy about it. It's not going to necessarily inform you. What if you asked a different question? Something, this is not necessarily the right answer for you, but something like, what would you like to grow over the next 20 years? Are you making daily deposits toward that growth? Are you keeping the main thing? Or are you spending a crap ton of time doom scrolling? Because that's probably not the way you're going to want to rock basically the 1,440 minutes that are in everybody's day. You got the same number of minutes that anybody's got.
Yeah.
And some of those minutes got to be used for sleeping so that we can, power up our brain after we've powered down. But one other thing that I'd like to drop, and that is, I love this ancient Chinese quote, and that is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And it's not to make us feel crappy that we didn't. Any more than what if I was to ask you, Jeremy, dude, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you have an iPhone 20 years ago?
Right. Because, they weren't a thing.
They weren't yet invented. We had this Palm Trio that sucked and it died. If you remember those Palm Pilots that were trying to make it made into phones, those were the early, they called them PDAs back then, not even smartphones or PDA phones, God knows what. Sadly, that company, was ahead of its time but not quite in sync with the technology, regardless of their story. We know that asking yourselves, why didn't you do this 20 years ago, is basically the same as asking yourself, why didn't you have that iPhone 20 years ago? In 2004, there were no iPhones. You didn't know better. And one of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes, I have a lot of them, is do the best you can. And when you know better, do better.
Do better. Yep.
Boom. Mic drop. Love that one.
Yeah, she's great.
She's great.
The other path I wanted to go down was depression. This is another. This is something that I wrestle with because I've tried the meds. They made me either want to kill myself or feel nothing or feel worse. And they were all trash for me. They didn't work for me. If they work for other people, cool, take them, live by them. For me, the best medicine I've ever taken is going to the gym 3 to 5 times a week. Like I go, I lift heavy things. I feel better. Life's manageable. I cry a lot when I'm lifting things, not just because it's hard, but because I'm like doing some inner work through the lifting. And it's been great. I'm struggling with, and I'm sure you've heard this before, the concept of, am I sick or is the world sick and I see it for what it is? Because I don't like the idea of me taking a pill to fit into a world where I don't fit in. because I don't think I'm the sick one. I think the idea that we have this finite amount of time to spin around on this rock and we spend it making rich people richer just rots me to my core. I don't want to live that way. So then the overwhelm, the comparison, am I doing enough? Have I come far enough? Am I enough? All starts to creep in because socially, culturally, I'm pulled to do these things I don't want to do. Financially, I'm pulled to do things I don't want to do. And we call it depression. But am I sick, or is the world sick?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I would say that neither is true. I would say that we adapt as well as we can, and we cope as well as we can. And just to borrow from Nietzsche and Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is partially true. It's actually how we cope with what didn't kill us. That might make us stronger. It actually might make us a lot weaker. But here, in terms of am I sick or is the world sick? Well, first of all, there are at least two realities. The world has always sucked and the world has always been awesome. And we have always been sick, and many of us have found other ways to adapt. The question is, where is your attention going? And are you basically, to borrow from going a lot of places, from Seinfeld, are you the king of your domain? Like, can you recognize?
Seinfeld bingo.
Yeah, I even got the pen. I got the one that, Jerry, keep the pen. Why did you keep the pen, Jerry? I love that. Love that episode. But are you in control of the things that matter most to you? Are you spending time with the people who matter to you? Are you paying attention to the things that matter to you? And are you working on fixing the things that matter to you in the places where you can be effective? Because there are things that will suck and will always suck that we will never be able to touch. Mm-hmm. There are people who we will be able to touch, who we will be able to, connect with and perhaps even grow with. To your point, by the way, about antidepressants, for some people, that is not an option. For many people, it's the lifting of weights. Personally, I used to do long distance cycling, and I noticed that when the lactic acid would build up in my thighs, old memories would come to me. Painful. My brain would associate the pain to other pain.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'd yell, sometimes I'd scream, sometimes I'd cry, sometimes I'd have memories of that mean second grade teacher I had who sucked so bad. And other voices show up when we're in pain. But asking ourselves more questions, the more questions we can ask ourselves, some of them, you'll see that the premise of them may not lead us where we want to go. Do I suck or does the world suck? I don't think it's complete enough. I'd ask myself, what do I want to grow once again? Yeah. Is that realistic? What's the timeline for growth? Where am I focusing my attention? Are there things that are bleeding me rather than feeding me? Like some of us doom scroll and see all of the awfulness in the world. Mm-hmm. And I'd have to ask them, does that feed you? Is that actually using your dash correctly? Or is it basically tantamount to a form of porn that goes nowhere?
Yeah. The same cheap dopamine hit that you get from the phone. Yeah.
Could be a cheap dopamine hit, can be a whole host of things that drive us to do this. Could be, compassion, but we also know that there's compassion fatigue, that how dare I live in this world and not see this? Then I would ask that person, are there causes you want to work for to make your butterfly effect?
You generously said earlier that perhaps what I'm sharing here relates to many of our listeners. I hope so, because that's the whole reason I'm doing this thing. But so walk me through some. I mean, I love the idea. This is something that I'm hearing more and more from my coach, people I work with, is just ask yourself better questions. That is a hell of a tool to keep in your tool belt when you're asking the wrong questions and ending up in the same desperate loop. What are some other tips or I guess tools to have in the toolbox that you recommend to your clients and people that really moves the needle for them?
Well, one of the things that I try to help people realize is that working on yourself is not selfish. It's actually good for the people around you. All of the stakeholders benefit when we become less intolerable, because we all have, I don't care who we are, all of us has something within us that kind of sucks to be around. None of us is a free lunch. I remember reading somewhere, I think it was Brad Pitt who said it. One of these great, people who could walk into any room and leave with anybody he wanted, basically said if they really, really, really got to know me, they would be surprised and probably disappointed. And, I've done years of work. I still can be shown my ass by my wife, who knows me really well. And I'll be like, oh man, you're right. That sucked. Yeah. And it will remain a work in progress. I will always be working on reducing it. So all of us need to connect with ourselves first. So the reason I wrote this book about connection and the 4 ways that we connect is because I keep hearing that word connection. I've provided approximately 20,000 hours of individual and couple therapy. I have conducted well over 200 interviews on my own podcast, and I've read tons of books. And every step of the way, whether it's the therapy that I've conducted or the podcasts I've had or the books I've read, this word connection keeps showing up, but no one's really defined it. It's been this nebulous thing. We all want this. We're all chasing this thing, and now I'm going to go with Lord of the Rings. I mean, my precious is not a ring. My precious is really connection. And unlike my precious, it doesn't end up killing us unless we connect with the wrong things. But so we connect with ourselves first. Who are we? What do we want? Like what creates an important life? What are the things that make us come alive? And for each of us, there's a different connection formula. For you and me, I would bet that if you and I were like write out a chart of the things that bring us alive, and by the way, that's the working definition. The short end, I have 2 pages of a definition of what connection is, but it's whatever brings us alive. And it's either there or it's not. Like, I would love to be able to sit with my dad through 6 hours of Wagnerian opera and say, wow, that was amazing. Wow. But for me, that would be a very expensive place to sleep. Yeah. For my dad, I mean, he comes alive. For me, I need to be around pets every day. Every day. I love dogs. I love cats. I'm a convert. That Yoda behind us is the guy who jumped me into the cat gang. I think cats are amazing. And as an extrovert, they've really taught me a lot about introspection and introversion in a good way. They've been amazing. I love a good cat, a dog-like cat, a cat, not a skittish cat, but a really hands-on. Yeah. Like, so funny. My cat literally just ran over to me as I said that. My dad does not need to touch a cat or a dog for the rest of his life, or any animal for that matter. That is not part of his connection formula. And each of us has a connection formula. And the problem also with being a high achiever is oftentimes these high achieving folks are paid very well to look for problems. And the problem with looking for problems is that when we come home, we continue to look for problems rather than to look for what's good. Yeah. And that actually interferes with our connection. So one of the things I did was I looked at connection in all of its dimensions, connecting with ourselves and then rippling outward, connecting with others, like I'm connecting with you, or the way I might connect with my wife and kids, or the people who come to see me. And then connecting with the world. Connecting with the world is connecting with art, nature, work, things like that. And connecting with something greater. I don't care if you're an Orthodox atheist. If you go to the Himalayas or to Yosemite or the Grand Canyon, you're going to be like, wow. It's something hits you. But something greater is also what you and I are doing right now. You and I, Jeremy, are bigger than me alone. Like the two of us together, if you and I were like to workshop an idea of like a thing, we'd come up with better ideas. That is something greater in and of itself. The Dodgers just won the World Series. Shohei Ohtani did not do it alone. In fact, there were some other really, I mean, as a diehard Giants fan, to celebrate these guys is a little tough, but it was pretty, I saw them. I mean, they executed beautifully and they did it together. There was something greater going on, and that was teamwork. And I love, the dream team, not the dream team. I guess it was the miracle on ice that took place in 1980 when the U.S. team that was comprised of individuals who were not necessarily the best of the game, no real stars, but they congealed and created a unit that blew away the so-called better team. The underdog won because of something greater. And it wasn't necessarily spiritual. It was a bunch of men converging and doing something bigger and better and saying the team matters more than any of us individually. So I really geeked out to this. I spent 20 months writing this book, basically every weekend. It was really hard. And there were moments of great fun and flow. And one of the things I recognized when I was writing this is one of the best ways to ascertain if this activity is good for you that you're doing, whatever it might be, could be podcasting. And Jeremy, I'm going to bet you $5 Canadian that
that's not a lot of money.
I'm keeping it low stakes.
Sure.
I'm going to bet you $5 Canadian, but obviously jokingly, that you being a podcaster meets all 4 criteria that I'm about to drop. And one of the ways we can do this, these are all research-based. These are not fluffy or new agey. Nothing in my book is. Everything's backed by research. But I'm going to guess that this activity really goes with the acronym FEED, F-E-E-D, FEED. First one is, does it provide you with flow? Does a 30-minute interview feel like 10 minutes? Or does it feel like, 10 hours? If you're experiencing flow, if you're experiencing total immersion, losing yourself, like Eminem talks about, if you're experiencing that, you're experiencing flow in all likelihood, if it's challenging you as well. The second one is, does it energize you? Does it require energy from you? And does it give you energy on the other side? Third one is educate. Does it move the needle? Are you learning something every episode? And the fourth one is, does it provide depth? Is there meaning for you in doing this? And if it provides all 4, it's very predictive of being antidepressing, moment, at least temporarily reducing anxiety and boosting fulfillment, happiness, whatever word you want to use. So that's one of the best ways to connect with yourself and connect with others. And I talk about connecting with friends and the scenario when you're with a really good friend and time just flies by and you get in your car and you're just like way taller and you're like, wow, I call it the drive away test. Like, did you drive away feeling bigger and taller and better? And like, that was an amazing use of time. Or do you feel like shrunk and they were like talking at you and bringing it all back to themselves? It's like, oh yeah, let me tell you more about me. And what do you think about me? It's like, okay, well, if it's diminishing, that's obviously not a very good use of time, and probably is not very feeding. Anyway, those are some of the thoughts that I have on connection and making sure that you're connecting with yourself and others. If in the former one, it would probably go on the feed. Probably time goes by fast. You're probably getting energy back and using energy. You're probably learning something, and it probably is meaningful.
Yeah, I've got a pretty pink Canadian $5 bill here somewhere for you. So right, I'll dig that up and send it over. So last question here. On the other side of that, for the person that doesn't have that thing that feeds them, where do they find it?
So they need to find it for themselves. And
that doesn't help. That's hard work. Come on.
It's actually not. It's actually not, because if you see yourself as a human experiment, my friend and one of my heroes, AJ Jacobs, who uses himself as a human experiment in all of his books, if we're willing to look at our life as an experiment and have an experimental mindset and realize it's all an experiment, we don't know the outcome, but try different things. Will Schwalbe, who was on my podcast, he's an author, amazing human being. One of his closest friends is a Navy SEAL, and he's an out gay man. So it's like he's willing to stretch and be cognitively flexible. Every week, once a week, he goes to an activity that he thinks will not interest him. A book reading, an art showing, a play that
every week
he does one thing that he thinks will not interest him. Now, I'm not recommending that people
to the experiment right there. That's commitment. That's amazing.
That's commitment. I love that. But I'm a big fan of do something different. Try something else out. Come up with a laundry list. Come up with like what we used to use in Netflix when we were renting the DVDs. Come up with like a queue of things that you can do. Try them out and see if you come alive. We don't know. Now, there may be things that interfere with our abilities to come alive, like depression, and that would compel us to seek out therapy, possibly medication. I'm aware that you're not a fan of the latter, at least. It could be coaching. It could be an exercise regimen. I don't know. But if there is depression, that can occlude our ability to actually feel joy due to what's called anhedonia, or it saps our ability to find joy in things that might otherwise be joyful. But even for the depressed individual, they may not be entirely shut down to the joy that they experience. One of the things that we know for sure, by the way, if you're experiencing depression, is giving to others, volunteering for a cause that matters to you. I remember when I've gone through depression a few times myself, and it sucks. I mean, there's a reason why cancer survivors who also experience depression, when they were asked afterwards, after both were basically in remission, they were asked which would they rather experience, the cancer or the depression. Most of them said very clearly, I would rather get the cancer back than the depression. The depression sucked that much.
Wow. So
depression is no joke. And it can ruin our relationships. We can be irritable, blah, 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 blah. It's a tough thing. But if we give of ourselves, human beings, we're pro-social, unless we're psychopaths. We are pro-social. We want to give of ourselves. I mean, just a little throwaway that's really funny is Ben Franklin, arguably the greatest relationship maker of all time, knew that if he wanted to convert an enemy into a friend, he would ask that person a favor. Sounds counterintuitive, I know. Like, why would an enemy want to do a favor for someone? Yeah. And the reason is we have these pro-social brains. We actually generally care about people, and it's like, wow. Well, and it also means it's kind of a compliment. It's like, wow, Ben Franklin thought I was smart enough to be asked an opinion or asked to borrow a book or whatever it might be. And then they start caring about the cause. But the bottom line is, when we give, we feel better. In fact, even looking at the elderly, and one of their biggest complaints is, yes, I'm being given to, but I don't get to give. I don't feel useful. Humans want to be useful. Arnold Schwarzenegger, his book is titled Be Useful. And that was a mandate from his father. And he's gone on to be very useful, I would say.
I think so.
He's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Adam, I'm so glad we did this. I don't often say yes to interviews. I'm so glad I did, because you have won the best friend bingo game. So thank you for doing that. This has been incredibly helpful, just to help me reframe some of the stuff that I'm literally in the middle of trying to cope with right now. So personally, thank you. For the audience, thank you. I think they'll find a lot of value in this too. The book would be an incredible benefit for them as well. Where can we find out more about that?
Excellent. Yeah, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Audio book is available on Audible, and it's also available on Kindle. So I'm really excited that it's out there. It's getting really well reviewed. People love it, and that makes all of that time that I put into it so worth it.
Amazing. You can find the link to that in the show notes for this episode. Adam, thanks so much for your time today. It really means a lot.
Jeremy, total blast. Loved hanging with you.
All right, that was my conversation with my new best friend, Adam Dorsey, a psychologist and author of Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. You can find the links to him and to the book and to all the things related to him in the show description of this episode and on our website, thefitmess.com. And that's where we'll be back in just a few days with another new episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
We know this podcast is amazing and it doesn't seem to lack anything, but we need a legal disclaimer. Prior to implementing anything discussed in this podcast, it is your responsibility to conduct your own research and consult your physician. You should assume that Jeremy and Zach don't know what they're talking about, and they're not liable for any physical or emotional issues that occur directly or indirectly from listening to this podcast.